Hello, welcome to Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. I'm your host for this episode, Ted Gotsch, and today we will be speaking to David Alpher, the Academy's Director of Federal Public Policy Outreach, Katie Dzurec, the Academy's Director of State Public Policy Outreach, and Matthew Sonduck, the Academy's Director of Public Policy, about the Academy's work in the public policy arena, its outreach efforts, and its priorities for 2026. David, Katie, and Matthew each play a prominent role in taking the Academy's mission of informing public policy and assisting policymakers at all levels of government and making it a reality. But how do they do that, and what does it entail? We are about to learn more. Before we jump into all the Academy does, however, I thought it would be important to explain why the Academy does what it does when it comes to public policy. And Matthew, I was hoping this might be something that you could explain to listeners.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. So, from its founding about 60 years ago, the Academy's mission is to serve the public in the U.S. actuarial profession. We fulfill that mission by advancing professionalism, informing public policy, enhancing member value, and communicating effectively. Today, primarily, we will be discussing the informing public policy objective. Broadly speaking, the Academy provides impartial expertise and guidance to public policy decision makers across various levels, local, national, and international, and across a spectrum of domains where critical public policy conversations take place. The Academy does this by supporting informed decision making, by public policy decision makers by providing independent and objective actuarial input, ensuring that actuaries understand public policy developments to ensure compliance with regulations governing areas such as healthcare affordability, retirement plans, and financial reporting, and advocating for policies that promote the use of actuarial expertise in emerging areas, advance the profession's interests, and advocate for policies that encourage innovation. The Academy produces a significant amount of thought leadership annually aimed at all of the aforementioned actions.
Well, that explains why the Academy is involved in public policy issues. But what are the topics that this organization and its volunteers are focused on specifically? Matthew, if I could, I'm going to circle back to you on this to discuss.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. So the Academy covers a broad spectrum of public policy issues and has a robust infrastructure that engages on public policy issues that impact all practice areas, including casualty and property insurance, health insurance, life insurance, retirement, and risk management and financial reporting. That being said, many of the public policy issues where the Academy engages fall under what we like to call mega issues. For example, access to and affordability of insurance is one of the Academy's key mega issues and spans across the different practice areas, including casualty and property insurance, health insurance, life insurance, and others. I would encourage everyone listening to today's podcast to go to the Academy's website, actuary.org, and click on Policy and Research, and select Policy Forum for more information and available Academy resources on the so-called mega issues.
Thanks, Matthew, for those insights. I think you've definitely earned a break from the hot seat. So for now, I'm going to turn to David to explain the Academy's involvement in federal policy, including how it interacts with government.
Sure. Thank you, Ted. So I'll restate a couple of things that Matthew touched on. The Academy provides Congress, congressional committees, and federal agencies with independent, objective actuarial analysis on complex issues involving risk assessment, financial security, and long-term sustainability. The Academy has over 20,000 members, all of whom possess specialized and recognized knowledge that can help those policymakers understand the financial implications of proposed legislation affecting pensions, insurance, healthcare, and social insurance programs. So all of that information serves a critical role in federal programs. Actuaries and their services are essential to the proper functioning of federal programs such as Social Security, Medicare, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, and others, as well as a federal interaction with largely state-based insurance systems. The Academy helps Congress understand how policy changes would affect these programs and systems' solvency, sustainability, and ability to serve the American people. Risk management and financial stability is a particularly important part of that, especially in an era of economic uncertainty, climate change-driven shifts and extreme events, and demographic shifts. Part of actuaries' fundamental role is to provide early warning and analysis on emerging threats to financial stability and retirement security so that policymakers can better anticipate and mitigate systemic risks. Through federal outreach, the Academy helps identify emerging challenges in insurance markets, pension funding, retirement and lifetime income strategies, healthcare options and costs, and financial regulation before they become critical, which gives policymakers time to develop effective and thoughtful solutions rather than reacting to problems or crises as they arise. And it's the Academy's role to help make our profession's expertise as broadly useful as possible. Finally, a word on standard setting and professional integrity. The U.S. actuarial profession is self-regulated, with the Academy housing and managing actuarial standards of conduct, qualification, and practice. The Academy's work in maintaining qualification standards and ethical guidelines ensures that when Congress receives actuarial analysis from Academy members or other credentialed actuaries, whether from government agencies or private sector, that analysis is subject to rigorous professional standards, and it's part of our role to communicate that effectively.
So, David, as March approaches, the Academy is getting ready to hold its annual Hill visits. I was hoping you might explain what exactly that is and how volunteers and staff come together to maximize its effectiveness.
Sure. So the Academy's public policy group helps to translate complex actuarial concepts into accessible language for policymakers and their staff, enabling informed decision-making on technical matters that have profound real-world consequences for constituents. So the Hill visits are our flagship way of bringing that together, with over 40 Academy volunteers convening over 3 days this coming March to visit a range of congressional offices. The idea there is to go in with teams that can represent critical issues such as the ones that Matthew mentioned, those mega issues, to the Academy and the actuarial profession. These are also key areas in American financial security, and present the work that we've done, answer questions, and raise the Academy flag as a place where answers to those questions can be found. We have a nonpartisan public interest mission, so unlike lobbying organizations, the Academy's advocacy focuses on education and technical assistance. We do not advance particular policy outcomes, and we take no sides in those outcomes. We, the members of the Academy and the Academy's dedicated staff, serve the public interest and the actuarial profession by ensuring that legislators have access to sound actuarial science and the perspective of the profession when making decisions that affect millions of Americans' financial security. So our members, including the ones we bring together for events like the Hill visits, work across consulting, corporate leadership, regulation, and academia, and we provide Congress with a comprehensive view of how federal policymaking affects different stakeholders and sectors of the economy. This is critical for addressing key issues for the Academy, such as how AI, climate change, and an aging population may affect insurance and retirement systems and programs like Social Security, just to name a few.
That's insightful, David. Thank you. But just to be clear, the Hill Visits isn't the only outreach effort the Academy makes each year to federal policymakers, correct? I mean, what else does this organization do to help educate and inform?
So that's correct. So we're developing an ongoing relationship over and above the Hill visits, still sometimes with the congressional offices, but much more broadly with those committees and government offices that I mentioned just before, which help us to get into those important conversations as early as possible. Aside from the publications on the Academy website, we've produced things like letters on specific areas of interest like the NOAA $1 billion database. We have held events like a symposium on the future of retirement, and we'll be in contact with the government on a continuous basis. And the ongoing nature of that effort builds relationships and more substantive conversations, which in turn helps us maintain our independence and neutrality, because we want to be more involved from the shaping phase of policy discussions and away from the end where decisions are or have actually been made, which is where lobbying, which again we don't do, might be a more appropriate effort.
Got it. Thank you for clearing that up. Now, that's a great sort of overarching, mention about federal policy, what the Academy does, what its volunteers and staff does. Matthew, though, I know, there are differences between the practice councils, and we're just wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about that. And I think maybe Katie might have something to interject on the health insurance side as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. So each practice area is a bit unique in its public policy engagement, and it largely depends upon the government legislative and regulatory structure specific to that practice area. So, for example, on the retirement side, most of our interactions are at the federal level, whereas on the life insurance side, most of our interactions are at the state level. So it really is dependent upon the practice area and the government structure underneath that. And I'll turn it over to Katie to talk a little bit about what's going on the health side.
Yeah, on the health side, it's such a great example of the state-federal overlap because federal government passes the law and then the states have to do things to implement. But, there are just so many things going on for all those pieces. I think one of the best examples is the Affordable Care Act, right? So the Affordable Care Act outlines expectations and protections for all kinds of healthcare coverage, most specifically individual and small group market coverage. But it's still up to states to pass legislation to identify coverage mandates. It's up to the state insurance departments to license and regulate the health insurers in their markets. Those insurers have to be financially sound. They have to market products and sell products according to state law. They have to follow through on the promises they've made to consumers. And with all that in mind, the federal government has set a floor and put some parameters around what can and can't be done in every state's health insurance market. So there's that going on. And then, as most people are probably well aware, there are federal dollars that flow or don't flow to the states depending on choices about Affordable Care Act provisions. And those are coming from Congress, they're coming from federal policymakers. States have to adjust to the choices that are made at the federal level. And then they have to decide, do we want to step in and fill funding gaps? Do we want to have benefit mandates that go beyond the federal minimums? And what does that mean for the states? And what does it mean for their residents? So, you've got this push-pull from federal decisions down to the states. And then at the same time, you have states doing their own things, innovating, experiencing successes within their borders for their residents, and policymakers at the federal level and Congress or even federal regulators can look at those successes and leverage them on a larger scale and say, let's do that at the national level. And, sort of thinking about it's like Justice Brandeis referred to states as laboratories of democracy, and this is sort of a microcosm of that, I think. But then there are government programs, right, like Medicare and Medicaid that are federal programs. They're regulated through the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, but states play a role in implementing those programs and supporting those programs. The federal government sets national standards, and then the states have things to administer. So there's a whole lot, especially in the health world, of give and take between the state and federal players.
Right, exactly. I'm going to turn back to Katie. Now we're going to discuss state policy. And Katie, I know there's a lot to explain when it comes to how the Academy engages on the state level and who they work with. Fill us in a bit on that.
Sure. So just as high-level overview, and we'll hear this message over and over again, the United States has a state-based insurance regulatory system. This is critical messaging for a lot of the stakeholders we work with. And so with the state-based system, the Academy engages with state insurance regulators all the time. The primary stakeholder for state engagement for us in this space is really the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Those are the insurance regulators. And so they're going to be the folks who are flagging that the McCarran-Ferguson Act granted primary authority to regulate insurers and the business of insurance. That authority goes to the states. But state regulators aren't the only players that we're working with in this space. Insurance-related laws are part of what we want to be talking about and what we want to be part of. So we're building on existing relationships with the National Conference of State Legislatures, that's NCSL, and the National Council of Insurance Legislators, which is NCOIL. So our outreach this year will include targeted outreach to them. In addition, other state agency-oriented associations like the Governors Associations and the National Association of Medicaid Directors are also on our list for additional outreach and engagement.
You're listening to Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. On this podcast, we talk to Academy volunteers and leaders as well as friends of the Academy, about what excites them about their work, both professionally or as an Academy volunteer. I'd like to remind you that on March 9th, the Academy is hosting the inaugural Spring Policy Summit in Washington, D.C., which will provide actuaries with a focused opportunity to deepen their understanding of the policy landscape during a pivotal midterm election year. Now, back to Ted Gotsch.
I know it's fair to say that the majority of what the Academy interplay on the state level certainly is with NAIC. If you could, Katie, just sort of explain how that organization functions for those who are not maybe as versed on it as you are.
Yeah, and this is a fun sort of meander. The NAIC is state insurance commissioners or directors. Some states have different names for their primary insurance regulator, but the states are the members, and the states and then the territories in Washington, D.C. are the members, and the members are broken out into committees, an executive committee plus letter committees, and that's A through H, literally letters, A, B, C, D. And then each of the letter committees covers specific topics, and a commissioner from each state serves as a chair, a vice chair, and then as members of each of those committees. So every year, chairs are assigned to each of the letter committees, and then the groups under those committees will either adjust assignments for those groups under the committees, but a lot of times the subgroups will tend to keep the same leadership. It varies year to year and from NAIC president to NAIC president, but regardless, the topics tend to remain pretty stable. So in the executive committee, they think about the high level structural stuff. And the most high touch task force for us at the Academy right now from the executive committee is the RBC Model Governance Task Force. We've been engaging with them since they were created last February. We've been asked to assist with a gap analysis and prioritizing RBC formula changes. And historically speaking, it's important to note that the Academy has been engaged on RBC development since its inception in the 1990s. Risk-based capital is one of the tools in the U.S. solvency toolbox, and our structure is very different from solvency oversight in other countries. So there's a whole lot to unpack in the RBC space, and we should probably do that on another podcast. But it's something that we've put a lot of work into. It's a cross-practice priority for the Academy. Also at the executive level, we're seeing some indication that there may be a natural catastrophe risk and resilience task force. And when we see it listed right now, it's still saying pending adoption. So I'm not entirely sure yet what's going to happen, but whatever it is, we'll be keeping an eye on it. We'll be staying engaged because obviously the natural catastrophe risk is something that our P&C committee has been incredibly involved in. And so we'll be staying in touch on that. Then with the letter committees, you've got A committee, which covers life and annuities. And so our Life Practice Council volunteers are already heavily involved in the work of the A committee. There's a bunch of overlap with E committee, which covers financial condition and investment risk and evaluation. The Academy is in fact named in the Life Actuarial Task Force charges under the A committee. We have an ad hoc working group under the Life Practice Council supporting work on gap analysis for the Model Governance Task Force. And then I think in 2025, the Life Practice Council submitted something like 26 comment letters on A committee and LATIF exposures. So lots of stuff going on in the life world. In B committee, it's the Health and Managed Care Committee. So for most of our listeners, you probably know the Health Practice Council is working closely with these guys. Health Actuarial Task Force is under B committee. When we put out a premium drivers paper every year, we usually share that with HATIF at the summer national meeting. We're also working on some prior authorization work products that will align with a white paper that the Regulatory Framework Task Force under B Committee just put out. The Health Innovations Working Group under B Committee is looking at Section 1331, 1332, and 1333 waivers under the Affordable Care Act. And that all really aligns with our Health Practice Council's state considerations brief that we released late last year. And then B Committee also houses the Senior Issues Task Force. So our long-term care committee has been engaging with the Senior Issues Task Force and will continue to do that through 2026. C Committee is the Casualty and Property Committee. And of course, when it comes to data gathering, affordability and home replacement costs, climate resiliency, cyber risk, title insurance, workers' comp, our casualty practice group is fully aligned, working on a ton of stuff, and there's just a lot of material that is being shared across the two organizations. D Committee is market regulation, that's market conduct exams. It's actually a space where we hope to build out more engagement, because when regulators are conducting surveys or doing market conduct exams, companies often rely on their actuaries to provide some data and provide some information, but it kind of feels like a black box from the regulatory perspective. Someone says, yeah, our actuaries said this, and the examiner may say, okay, we'll take your word for it. So I definitely think there's room for the actuaries to learn what their counterparts are being relied on for, and also room for us to educate market conduct examiners and market regulators to sort of understand this is what the actuaries do, but this is what the actuaries don't do. So I'm really looking forward to building some partnerships with the D Committee chairs in 2026. E Committee, as I mentioned before, is the Financial Condition Committee, and that's where the Capital Adequacy Working Group lives. That's where all three RBC working groups live. So Academy actuaries have been helping on, developing factors and updating factors in the RBC formulas for decades. The Casualty Practice Council just provided a report on premium and loss concentration factors. So our actuaries engage a lot with E-Committee. And then also E-Committee covers valuation, reinsurance, and group solvency. So RIMFRIC is pretty aligned with E-Committee as well. I'll quickly mention F-Committee because it's the Financial Regulation Standards and Accreditation Committee, but we sort of keep an eye on how F-Committee actions affect or are affected by other financial insolvency conversations elsewhere. G-Committee is the International Committee, and as many of you know, we have a relatively new international committee here at the Academy. So even though we're focused on the U.S. actuarial profession, U.S. insurance markets are part of a global system, and the NAIC engages with partners at the federal and international levels, so we have to stay on top of what's going on at the federal and international levels as well. And then finally, H-Committee. If you're not totally tired of hearing about these yet, this is the last one. H-Committee covers innovation, cybersecurity, and technology, and that's where AI and big data live. So this is another cross-practice. This is sort of our cross-practice bookend here. These are the topics that are disrupting, either positively or negatively, every line of insurance at every level, state, federal, international. So our practice councils are monitoring, commenting, collaborating, sharing resources. I think this committee and its topics are definitely keeping us busy. So stay tuned for all the fun and all the letters going forward.
Well, I appreciate that insight, Katie, really do. For those who are devoted Actuary Voices listeners, they may remember hearing you discuss the Academy's engagement with the NAIC last year, but for those who might have missed it or need a refresher, can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, real quickly. I mean, the NAIC holds 3 national meetings per year. They're huge meetings, lots of stakeholders. We sort of see a cycle that happens across the 3 meetings. So the first meeting of the year, the spring national meeting, that occurs shortly after chairs are named and committees are reformed. So the spring national meeting is usually a kickoff of new work. It's time to get everybody focused up on the stuff that might be rolling over from last year. So we're sort of setting the stage at the spring national meeting. The summer national meeting is where the committees and the work groups are sort of checking in on all the work they've done and how much progress have they made. That's really where people are checking in to make sure folks are staying on track, or, do we need to re-strategize if project plans have started to get off track? And then we get to the fall national meeting, and that's usually sort of to close out, adopt the work that was done throughout the year. New officers are elected and sworn in. The way the executive committee works is usually, officers rise from one to the next. So secretary, treasurer to vice president to president-elect, right? So they're rising up. So unless there are intervening circumstances, Really, the only new information from elections is who's the incoming secretary or treasurer. And this year's secretary treasurer is actually a member of the Academy. So we're super excited to boast about that a little bit. And then keeping all of this in mind, that this happens 3 times a year and these things happen, the Academy staff and volunteers also get to participate in different ways at the national meetings. We have a reserved seat at all 3 of the actuarial task force sessions to provide updates on relevant work and provide a professionalism overview. But we also look for opportunities to present on the resources and support that we offer to policymakers across the board, not just to the actuarial task forces and not just to the financial groups. We share our issue briefs, our infographics. We hope that members can take those back to their colleagues and share them within their insurance departments, but also across state agencies, and hope that they leverage our materials to help with decision making. I think one of the things to note is that if we're presenting at the national meeting, we have a very short time. We maybe have like 2 to 5 minutes to provide any comments, to provide updates. If we're presenting to subgroups on a specific topic, we usually get maybe 7 to 15 minutes. So another thing that we lean on and we leverage throughout the year is engaging on interim conference calls. And for those, they're held between the meetings. That's where a lot of the work gets done. And so if we have really meaty topics to discuss, we may look to do presentations, or we may be asked to do presentations during one of these calls, because that gives us a full hour, or could even be 90 minutes to do that full-blown presentation. Of course, our 2026 priorities across all the practice councils are pretty meaty. So we're going to be looking for more engagement in the interim conference calls this year.
Well, we've talked a lot, obviously, about NAIC engagement, and we sort of mentioned a little bit previously, but that's not the only state organization, obviously, that the Academy interacts with when it comes to policy. I was hoping, Katie, before we give you a rest here, and Matthew, if we could maybe talk a little bit about some of the other organizations beyond the sort of just initial mention that came up here earlier.
Sure, I'll cover maybe NCOIL and then I'll turn it back over to Katie. So on the NCOIL side, if you think of the NAIC as like an entity that serves insurance regulators, NCOIL is more geared towards the insurance legislators. It's the state representatives who draft the legislation that may eventually get enacted at the state level. So they have a slightly different focus, but their purpose is pretty similar. So NCOIL writes model laws in insurance, works to preserve the state jurisdiction over insurance as established by McCarran-Ferguson, which you heard Katie mention, as well as serves as an educational forum for public policymakers and interested parties. So the Academy engages with NCOIL pretty regularly, and we have presented at a few of their meetings in the past. What I would recommend podcast listeners do is go to our blog that I authored in 2024, the Actuarially Sound blog, to hear more if they want to learn more about this important organization.
The other state legislative organization that we are working with and hope to work with more in the coming years is NCSL, the National Conference for State Legislatures. So unlike NCOIL, they're not entirely focused on insurance issues. However, they track thousands of issues and sub-issues across their sort of priority areas. And many of those priority areas overlap with the things that are our priority areas. They're looking at health legislation, human services, so the Medicaid and the services for folks within states. They're looking at retirement. They're looking at insurance affordability, both on the property and casualty side and on the health side. They're, of course, all over AI and cyber threats. So as they're thinking about and tailoring their messages for their legislature constituents, we have lots to offer in terms of our materials, in terms of conversations, in terms of the, unbiased, objective products that we can share with them. Another association or organization that we are hoping to engage with more is the governors associations. And so there's a National Governors Association, a Republican Governors Association, and Democratic Governors Association. And ultimately, as they're thinking about what do they need to do for their constituents in their states, how do governors serve their states? How are they making policy decisions as part of their executive responsibilities? We want to be able to share the resources we have with all of them, regardless of party, because the reality is, while states face different challenges, a lot of the underlying stuff remains the same. So we'll be reaching out to them and engaging with them. And then we've got state-based exchange directors. We've got National Association of Medicaid directors. There are all kinds of state level offices that are thinking about retirement, that are thinking about health, and they have associations that, we're going to be engaging with as we move forward.
Well, we've obviously done the soup to nuts on all the different associations and at the state level across different positions. But I wondered, and maybe this is something all of you might have something to say a little bit about. Just wanted to ask you about, outside of these statewide bodies, does the Academy engage with individual states at all on different issues?
Yes, the short answer to that is absolutely. We engage with states. And let me give you a good example. So in 2021, Colorado enacted a statute called Protecting Consumers from Unfair Discrimination in Insurance Practices. This was a big statute. This was the first of its kind across the country, and the Academy engaged with Colorado both on the front end while they were considering the legislation. We had submitted comment letters to them about various provisions of the legislative text, and then post facto, so post it being enacted, we've been actively engaging with them on the regulatory side across the different practice areas. So this law covers, all different types of insurance. So it's really a cross-practice effort on the Academy's part to engage with Colorado as they're continuing to implement this law.
So I'll jump in with another one. We are also engaging with the District of Columbia on similar issues, specific to auto insurance in this case. But when it comes to property and casualty as a practice area especially, many of the issues of, for example, homeowners insurance access and affordability have particular importance in some states more than others, where you're talking about factors like flood zones, vulnerability to extreme weather events, things like that.
On the health side, we've had requests directly from state-based exchanges and from the state-based exchange directors who are, looking for resources that might help them think about some of the policies they're implementing or some of the ways they're looking at the benefits that they're offering. Different exchanges have different levels of involvement with other state agencies. So we've helped state-based exchanges and offered them some support and resources. And then also, not a state agency, but the health insurance trades like Blue Cross Blue Shield Association and AHIP, they're really functioning at the state level because state insurance is regulated by the states. And so we work with them and share resources and do all that. We're really working to engage with all the players at every level to make sure that ultimately decision makers and stakeholders have that unbiased, objective information that the Academy is so good at producing.
Great. Well, thank all three of you for those thoughts. As we sort of wind down here this episode, Matthew, I know we've talked about a lot of things the Academy does related to policy, and just hope you might be able to just remind folks where they can learn more about what we do and all the topics that the Academy touches.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. So for those who are interested about learning more, the best place to get information about the Academy and what it is we do is actuary.org. It contains every single work product that the Academy produces, whether it's a comment letter to Colorado or the Social Security challenge on the retirement side. Everything is there. So please visit actuary.org to find out more information.
All right, well, great. And again, I just want to thank David, Katie, and Matthew for all of your insights today. Listeners can learn more about the Academy's work in the public policy space, as Matthew said, by going to actuary.org and also by reading the September-October issue of Contingencies magazine, which featured a cover story on the topic. My name is Ted Gotsch, and I'm pleased to have had the opportunity to host this episode of Actuary Voices, the podcast of the American Academy of Actuaries. Visit the website actuary.org to learn more about all we do here at the Academy. and also follow us on X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast at your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, be well.